The vast majority of us who have been in the church world for several years, we're very familiar with the name of King David, the wonderful great king of Israel, who wrote tremendous numbers of the Psalms that we benefit from today. And was a very godly man, not a perfect man, certainly sinful, but the Bible talks about him being a man after God's own heart. And if you know the story of David's life, then you probably know the story of his son, a man by the name of Absalom. And I'm not going to retell the whole story today, but just in case you're not as familiar with it, Absalom was a very good-looking man. In fact, let me read to you what the Bible says about him. It's in 2 Samuel chapter 14, and I'm just reading the part about what he looked like. And if you begin reading at verse 25, here's what it says. Now in all Israel there was no one who was as praised as much as Absalom, David's son. For what? For his good looks. From the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, there was no blemish in him. So this is a good-looking guy. And then in verse 26, it adds what I think is a very significant detail, and I'll tell you why it's significant in a moment. Verse 26, and when he cut the hair of his head, at the end of every year he cut it because it was heavy on him. When he cut it, he weighed the hair of his head at 200 shekels according to the king's standard. So he's a good-looking guy, and he's got a lot of hair. I mean, he was famous for his hair. Now, the reason I bring that up, and some of you already know where I'm going with this, is because it was his hair, his long, luxuriant, flowing locks of hair, that proved ultimately to be his undoing. Because Absalom rebelled against his father. Absalom wanted to be king over Israel. And he didn't want to wait for his turn to take the throne. He believed that he was the one who was ready to be king, and he should be king before David was dead. So he leads this rebellion against David. And as you go through that part of 2 Samuel, it takes over a place over several chapters, this story, and it's so bad for David that he actually has to flee for his life, run away, and he has to stay in hiding for a while until the situation gets resolved. And people are following Absalom. And there's a story finally where Absalom is defeated. He's defeated. And the way he's finally killed, he's killed by David's general Joab, because as Absalom is riding away, he comes into a situation where he gets trapped literally by his hair. Let's go to 2 Samuel chapter 18, and let's read verse 9. Then Absalom met the servants of David. Absalom rode on a mule. The mule went under the thick boughs of a great terebinth tree, and his head caught in the terebinth. So really that means by his hair, he got caught in a tree. Remember how thick and heavy his hair was? That's what happened to him here. And it goes on, and it's kind of it's a crazy image to imagine, right? But listen to this. He was left hanging between heaven and earth, and the mule which was under him went on. So literally, you remember the stories of pilots coming down, their plane gets shot down in war, and they parachute down, and their parachute gets caught in a tree. Well, it was like this, except it was his hair. And without giving you all the details and taking all that time, Joab, David's general, hears about it, and he goes to where Absalom is hanging, and Joab kills him while he's hanging in this tree. Now, why do I bring this story up? Because a lot of people have the idea that this took place over just a short period of time. In fact, the other day, my son, who had been reading this story in the Bible, came to me and said, I noticed something in the Bible. And he talked about one of the details here, and I knew about it, but I hadn't actually stopped to think about it and the implications. And here's what he brought up, that it had been a very long time that Absalom had been in the process of making his plans and laying the foundation of his rebellion against his father, King David. What happened was Absalom would go to the gates of the city of Jerusalem, and people would come in and they wanted to, unload a little bit of their hardship and their suffering. And this is the king's son sitting there, and he would listen to them, and he would basically say, if I was judge over this land, I'd give you justice. And now people hear that and they gloss over it real quick. Okay, Absalom's trying to win people's hearts. That's what the Bible, in fact, says he did. And they make the assumption that it just took place over, maybe a year or two. Because by the time Absalom's caught in his hair, he's got that big head of hair, so he's still a young man. But actually, that wasn't how it was. If you actually read the Bible, if you actually read what it says, right after the story of Absalom trying to win the hearts of the people, here's what it says, 2 Samuel 15, look at verse 7. Now it came to pass after 40 years. Now, I'm not going to read the rest of the story. You can read it for yourself. It's all there, 2 Samuel 15. But what that's telling us is that for 4 decades, listen to that, 4 decades, Absalom was working on winning the hearts of the people in preparation for his attempt to overthrow his father. And so by the time he's caught in the terebinth tree, he's not a kid anymore. He still has all that hair, probably still a good-looking guy, but he's not a young man. I was thinking about this as my son and I had this conversation, and it's been a few weeks ago we talked about this, and it's just been kind of going over in my head, this idea that the time for you to pray for God's protection, the time for you to seek the Lord for his mercy and grace in your life is not when you're in a crisis. The time for you to pray for God's protection and his mercy and his grace is when things are going well. David had no idea what Absalom was planning. David was completely caught off guard, and when Absalom rises up, David is stunned. He's shocked. He has no idea, and he's forced to flee for his life. Now, of course, God protects David, and God brings him deliverance, and the kingdom is restored to him. But think about this. For 40 years, his own son was planning to rebel against him, and David didn't know. And it kind of reminds me of the way that the devil works against us. We think when everything is going fine, we can relax. We can not worry as much about spiritual priorities. We can begin to focus on some of the things in this world that we'd like to own or buy or achieve or experience, whatever. And we let our guards slip a little bit spiritually. Maybe we let our guards slip quite a bit. And suddenly an Absalom situation arises, and we're fleeing for our lives because we weren't prepared. We weren't ready. And this idea of Absalom spending 40 years to put his rebellion into effect speaks to me of the way that the enemy, the devil, never stops in his plans to destroy us. When things are going well, when you're doing all right and you don't have any significant problems that you're aware of, that's the time to remember that the enemy has not forgotten you. He's not ignoring you. He's just postponing his plans for you until the time is right. And you need to be in prayer. You need to be seeking God. You need to retain your commitment to the Lord. That's not the time to get careless. That's not the time to just let things slide spiritually, because Absalom's rebellion is coming. And it may not take the form of your son coming against you. Listen, the enemy's got 1,001 ways to come against you. And the point is, you need God to fight on your behalf. And rather than being stunned and shocked and overwhelmed when you are attacked by the enemy, you want to be spiritually prepared. Don't allow yourself to become careless. Don't allow yourself to become complacent. Even when things are going well, seek God every day. Pray his protection upon yourself, upon your family, upon your home, upon your life, upon your church, your community, and that list could go on, your loved ones, your friends. Come to the Lord every day, read the scriptures every day, meditate on them, and prepare yourself, because Absalom is coming. You don't know when, you don't know where, you don't know how, but Absalom is coming. But if you're ready, if you've prepared yourself spiritually, then you don't have to be overwhelmed, because God will have put you in the place of his safety and his blessing and his protection.